According to French sociologist Bourdieu, habitus is not only a way to conceptualize society, it is also a process of enacting social change. Habitus is a system of social structures, in other words it is the social historical cultural context in which people live. Bourdieu believes that, while humans exist in these structures, they are not necessarily constrained to a certain predetermined set of actions. Habitus organizes the way individuals see the world and act. Individuals are subjects, in and of themselves, with a certain sense of agency. Let's see this principle in action.
Winthrop is a very steady young man. We're lucky to have him managing our firm for us.
Oh, hogwash. Exeter, Harvard, he's the product of good environment.
It's got nothing to do with environment. With his genes, you could put Winthrop anywhere and he's going to come out on top.
People like this are a menace to decent society.
You're from a broken home, of course.
If we was broke, so what?
You have a history of juvenile arrests, I presume, drug abuse, reform school, state prisons and all that?
You ain't talking to this guy. I want a lawyer.
That man is a product of a poor environment. There's absolutely nothing wrong with him. I can prove it.
Of course there's something wrong with him. He's a Negro. Probably been stealing since he could crawl.
Given the right surroundings and encouragement, I'll bet that that man could run our company as well as your young Winthrop.
Are we talking about a wager, Randolph? I suppose you think Winthrop, say if he were to lose his job, would resort to holding up people on the streets?
No, I don't think just losing his job would be enough for Winthrop. I think we'd have to heap a little more misfortune on those narrow shoulders. If he lost his job and his home and his fiancée and his friends, if he were somehow disgraced and arrested by the police and thrown in jail even, yes, I'm sure he'd take to crime like a fish to water.
You'd have to put him in the wrong surroundings, of course, with the worst sort of people. I mean real scum, Randolph.
We've done it before. This time it's in a good cause. How much you want to bet?
The usual amount?
Why not?
Bourdieu, however, is not stuck in the conflict between objectivism and subjectivism like Sartre, who believed that humans existed for themselves, apart from things, such as the idea that religion was a social institution. Instead, Bourdieu writes about the ability to reason between the objective and the subjective through discussion and dialogue. Objective culture is intrinsically related to the subjective individual. It is difficult to understand if the individual acts in relation to other subjective individuals, or if the individual acts in relation to objective conditions. Clifford Geertz wrote in reaction to a more hard science approach to anthropology. He conceptualized the role of anthropology as the search for meaning and symbolism in culture. In many ways, this is related to a school of thought that approached published writings as a way to interpret and understand it. From his point of view, all history is interaction that should be interpreted in terms of actors acting in relation to one another. If that is the case, let's watch Peter make history.
Boy, you know, I've always wanted to come in here, and now that I got a mustache, the timing feels right.
Wow, all this stuff looks pretty good. Can we get some salami and...
Brian, let me handle this. Scusi, babidi-boopy?
Che cosa? Peter, what are you doing?
Speaking Italian. Babidi-boopy? Babidi-boopidi-babidi-babidi.
Peter, you can't speak Italian just because you have a mustache.
Boopidi-bapa. Boop-a-beep-a-boop-a-bapa-beep-a-bapa.
Tu sei un pazzo, va via qui! Sono stanco di te, ti do un pugno nella testa! Ti uccido con questa carne!
Description is, essentially, an interpretation of interpretations. Geertz says that, in the study of culture, analysis penetrates into the very body of the object. That is, we begin with our own interpretations of what our informants are up to, or think they are up to, and then systematize those. The analysis of culture is guessing at meaning, assessing the guesses, and drawing explanatory conclusions from the better guesses. You do not necessarily have to know everything about all aspects of a culture to understand it.
Chaka Khan, Chaka Khan, Chaka Khan, Chaka Khan, let me rock it, Chaka Khan. Let me rock it, that's all I wanna do, Chaka Khan. Let me rock it, Chaka Khan. Let me rock it, let me feel for you, Chaka Khan. What you tell me what you wanna do? Do you feel for me the way I feel for you, Chaka Khan? Let me tell you what I wanna do. I wanna love you, wanna hug you, wanna squeeze you too. So let me take it in my arms.
Ferreira and Lang's work in narrative ethnographic research is vitally important for understanding cultures. Narratives tend to be interwoven with other social and cultural factors in the fabric of everyday life. Understanding the stories that people tell helps the researcher to interpret social and cultural contexts. The authors demonstrate this concept in their essay about indigenous peoples and diabetes. The way that the two people describe the onset of diabetes in their village speaks volumes about their relations with the white world.
In looking at diabetes from a broader perspective of poverty and despair and other types of issues that communities face, there is a connection between all of those experiences and the biochemistry and the physiology in the body. Think about living in poverty and the stress that people are under. This is not just a public health measure, this is a way of life.
It was a dirt floor. So I remember when we never swept the floor, we always just got the hose and went inside and sprinkled it with water.
And people are worried about whether or not they're going to be able to feed their children, or clothe their children, or survive a winter. Also in American Indian populations, we have higher rates of other types of terrible diseases and problems, things like infant mortality. And what a lot of us observe is that these terrible things that happen in terms of the health of a family and a community have an impact on the entire community. And we see things like more self-destructive behaviors, more alcohol and drug intake. And what we see is that early death in communities seems to facilitate more early death in the community. And this is not an objective public health measure. This is a reality of life for people, and it's terribly emotionally charged, and it has all kinds of stressful impact on the body. When we look at measures of stress, we look at different types of hormones like cortisol or epinephrine, which is adrenaline. All of those chemicals increase blood sugar. So not only are people faced with diabetes and high blood sugar, they're faced with stressful living environments in the communities and in the families. And it's those stressors that make the challenge of controlling diabetes that much more difficult.
But it was a bunch, she was drink a lot too, but it was all that stuff just all together,
So there is a direct biochemical connection between the trauma that people face living within a culture of poverty and blood sugar control. And we have to be cognizant of that when we're looking at trying to manage these types of diseases in impoverished communities.
Stories were about much more than diabetes. They were conceptual maps into the storyteller's perception of experiences, inequalities, and social conditions. Additionally, ethnographers must also be good narrators themselves. It is their job to identify and understand what someone else is doing, and to set a particular event within the context of a number of narrative histories. Ethnographers must also situate that behavior with reference to its place in the history of the social settings to which they belong. The story, and how it is told, is extremely important. By telling it in a certain way from a certain point of view, new details of historical and contemporary events can be uncovered. By giving voice to the voiceless, an ethnographer can make a big impact in understanding histories. By creating an alternative history to the one that we commonly understand, we can better interpret symbolic action within given cultural contexts.